Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. I'm really excited to show you guys a brand new power station from VigorPool. This is the Captain 700. Now this has a feature that a lot of power stations do not have. For example, I have two main head units here and this really cool parallel cable. And what you can do is connect them together to get double the wattage and double the capacity. So instead of just having an expansion battery, you can use two main head units. For example, the Captain 700 has a 700 watt inverter with around 672 watt hours of capacity. And if you connect them both together, you get a 1400 watt inverter with around 1344 watt hours of capacity. So that's a really cool feature. Now VigorPool is launching this power station at $499, and I'll include the link down to it down in the video description. But let's go ahead and break down some of the other features of the Captain 700. Now at the launch price of $499, this has a pretty decent list of features. For example, this does have lithium iron phosphate batteries, it has a wireless charging pad on the top, you have a really cool ambient light on the side of the power station that's controlled via the Smart App, meaning this does have Smart App connectivity, it supports fast wall charging and UPS functionality, and it has a cutover time of 10 milliseconds. This has a pure sine wave inverter that supports 700 watts output, also supports 240 watts of solar charging input. So pretty decently spec'd medium-sized power station. So in the rest of the video, we're gonna put these through a bunch of different tests to see how they actually perform. And at the end of the video, I'll put all those results in my power station grading sheet. Now the first test that we're gonna jump into are actually of the AC inverter. So if you flip the power station around, you'll see your AC outlets on the bottom where you can plug in your appliances, and you have a switch over here. Just remember, this is a 700 watt pure sine wave inverter rated at 120 volts. Let's see how it actually performs. First, I wanted to see the quality of the power that the Captain 700 inverter puts out. In this test, I pushed the inverter to the maximum output for 15 minutes. We can see if it holds the full rated wattage without overheating or experiencing voltage drop. Once I enabled the inverter and connected my load, it was putting out slightly under the 700 watt limit. After a few minutes of running the test, I checked the output with my oscilloscope. It was putting out a clean pure sine wave at 60 Hertz, and using my voltmeter, I could see it was sitting at a steady 119.4 volts output. These are very good results, similar to the power you get from your power company. Once the test had been going for 11 minutes or so, the power station fans were at their highest speed. And when testing the loudness of these fans, I was getting around 47 decibels at 3 feet away, and here's a demo of what the fans sounded like. These fans are really quiet compared to larger power stations that I've tested on the channel. I also wanted to see how well the power station was dissipating heat under full load. I took some pictures with my thermal camera, and throwing them up on the screen, you can see the hottest temperature during the test was 87 degrees Fahrenheit, with the exhaust being thrown out the back of the power station, so no overheating issues at all. Within the next couple minutes, my stopwatch hit the 16-minute mark, and the Captain 700 passed the max load test. I then charged both power stations and wanted to connect them together to see if they could handle the max rated output of 1400 watts in parallel. With both power stations connected together using the cable from VigorPool and both inverters enabled, I was successfully able to pull 1400 watts from both power stations. The voltage was at a steady 120 volts, and we were able to get a very crisp sine wave too. Pretty cool to be able to connect two smaller power stations together and get double the wattage. One way to test the surge of a power station inverter is by connecting it to a full-size refrigerator. When my basement fridge compressor turns on, it pulls over 2400 watts of surge. When connecting two Captain 700s in parallel, I was able to run this full-size refrigerator for over 11 hours without having it to be recharged. I did notice that one power station drained faster than the other, so maybe some tweaks to the firmware could help these stay synced up better. It would be better if one unit didn't die before the other. Overall, I really like the flexibility of having two smaller systems that can be connected to run a larger load. Some of my viewers power sensitive electronics like ham radio equipment or portable speakers on their power stations. For that reason, I like to test for noise or interference that the inverter may put out. Using my dirty electricity meter, I was seeing around 1485 millivolts of noise when the inverter was enabled, and with a reading around this level, you usually don't hear an audible buzz from the inverter. Now to confirm this, I plugged in my guitar amp into the inverter and the output was really clean, and this is what it sounded like. So you shouldn't have any problems running sensitive radio equipment off the VigorPool Captain 700 inverter. The Captain 700 also has the ability to act as an uninterrupted power supply, or UPS. This means that when you have the power station plugged into a wall outlet, it can bypass up to 600 watts straight through the power station to your devices, and if grid power goes down, the power station will automatically swap over to the batteries inside within a rated 10 milliseconds. In order to test this out, I had my micro desktop workstation running a stress test to push the power supply to its internal limits. I also ran a 24-inch LED monitor and my studio lights off the power station inverter so we could visually see the flicker during the transition of power sources. I simulated 5 different power outages by unplugging the power station from the wall. All 5 times, the PC was still running after it was unplugged, meaning the transition to battery power was very quick. The transition was so fast I couldn't even see the studio lights flicker. These are excellent results compared to other UPS power stations I've tested on the channel. The final tests that I completed on the VigorPool 700 were both for the AC capacity and AC idle tests. When draining the power station at a 0.2C rate via the AC inverter, I was able to pull 560 watt hours of capacity as the state of charge hit 5%. The result of this 560 watt hours is 83% of the advertised capacity. These results are fairly normal with a smaller power station since they tend to do better with DC capacity testing. I also wanted to test the capacity I could get from 2 Captain 700s connected together using the parallel cable. When I completed the discharge test with 2 of them, I was able to get 1130 watt hours of capacity out of the advertised 1344 watt hours. This is 84% of the advertised capacity, so slightly better with 2 units versus just 1. Now, how much power is used as the AC inverter is enabled and sitting idle? I started with the power station at 100% state of charge and left the inverter enabled for 13 hours with no load. When I came back, it was sitting at 76% state of charge, meaning the inverter had used around 24% of the battery, or about 1.8% per hour. And these results are pretty normal since most power stations I've tested use around 1.5 to 2% per hour while the inverter is left on. So what do you guys think of the performance while testing the inverters on these power stations? I was fairly impressed. We got 120 volts output, a very clean sine wave. The noise on the inverter is very minimal. And while testing the UPS functionality, we were able to get 10 millisecond cutover time so fast that my lights didn't even flicker. So pretty impressive. Now we did see the one issue when you have these connected in parallel, it did discharge one of them faster than the other. And because these are pre-production units, I think with a stable firmware release, they could fix that. So I have provided that feedback back to VigorPool. So we'll see how that goes. Now for the actual capacity, we got 83% and 84% on those discharge tests. That's pretty normal with a medium-sized power station. They do a lot better with DC capacity tests. So we'll have to see how it does with that. So we'll move on to the next set of tests with the DC output. Now for DC outputs, you have a 12-volt cigarette plug with a dust cover and 2 5521 barrel connections. You also have 2 USB-C 60-watt ports and 2 quick charge USB-A ports. So let's break down the results on those. The first thing I checked on the Captain 700 was to see if the DC output was regulated. This means that the DC voltage stays the same throughout the entire state of charge. When I plugged in my battery load tester, it was showing 12.9 volts. Looking at the specification sticker, the nominal voltage of the internal battery is 22.4 volts, so the output is definitely regulated. In the next test, I tried to pull as much power as possible from each of the available 12-volt outputs. On the 12-volt cigarette plug, I was able to pull around 145 watts. Connecting to one of the 5521 barrel ports, I was also able to pull around 144 watts. I then tried to pull the maximum power from 2 different ports at the same time to see if I can get any more wattage. It appears there is a set limit right around 145 watts, and then the power station shuts off the DC output from being overloaded and displays an error message on the screen. I then moved on to testing all 4 USB ports. This power station supports 2 60-watt USB-C power delivery ports, and I was able to charge both my Energizer 320 and EcoFlow River 2 Pro successfully at 60 watts each. I also tested the 2 USB-A ports by plugging in a small USB fan and a smartphone, and they both were powered up and charged without an issue. With all 4 USB ports in use, I was able to pull over 130 watts total from the power station. The Captain 700 also supports wireless charging on the top of the power station. The pad is rated at 10 watts, and when I put my smartphone on top, it successfully started to wirelessly charge. In the next test, I wanted to get an idea of the maximum output that the power station could handle with both the 12-volt outputs and the USB ports. I was able to pull 270 watts peak from the DC output combined. However, I did notice a small issue with one of the USB ports resetting back to 0 watts in a repetitive loop. It looks like this only happens when you're maxing out the entire DC output, and I'm pretty confident this USB-C issue could be resolved with a firmware update. This power station is the perfect size to take camping. My daughter and I went on a small overnighting camping trip with some friends, and we wanted to use this to power a portable projector after the sun went down. The Captain 700 worked flawlessly throughout the movie, and the girls enjoyed watching the movie under the stars. I also used the Captain 700 to run my IceCo Go 20 12-volt fridge overnight on the same trip, and it worked great and my fridge was still powered up in the morning. The final test I completed on the DC output were capacity and idle power usage tests. The VigorPool is advertised to have 672 watt-hours of capacity. While draining the power station completely down via the 12-volt socket at 10 amps, I was able to pull a total of 625 watt-hours over a 5-hour time period. These results were about 93% of the advertised capacity. In the next test, I like to see how much power the DC output uses while sitting idle and left on for a long period of time. I call this the DC idle test. I started the test at 100% state of charge on the power station, and checking in 10 hours later, it was still at 100% state of charge, meaning that the DC output is very efficient and didn't use any background power while sitting enabled with no load. So now that we finished the DC output testing, fairly good results. 93% of the advertised capacity on the discharge test. That's really good. That's where these medium-sized power stations really shine. We got a full 145 watts out of the 12-volt socket and 5521 connections. You know, some other power stations will only get around 130 to 125, so it is nice to get that little bit of extra power. It is nice that it has the wireless charging pad on the top. Now, a little bit of a bummer, it does not have a 100-watt USB-C port. It would have been nice to get at least one of those. It just has two 60s. Now, as for the issue we saw with those, whenever we max out the front panel, the DC output completely, we saw that the 60-watt port would reset back to 0 and then back up and then reset again. So I did provide the feedback to VigorPool to fix that through a firmware update. I do believe that's just a small little thing that can be fixed with a firmware update. So overall, fairly decent performance on the DC output. Works really well for 12-volt fridges, your 12-volt appliances, charging mobile devices. It's very efficient. In the next section of the video, I want to cover all the charging options for the Captain 700. Now, out of the box, you get 3 different cables. The first cable is a 12-volt car charging cable. You also get an AC charging cable, and lastly, you get an MC4 adapter for charging with solar panels. On the front of the power station, you have 2 charging ports underneath this small flap. Looking closer, the left charging port is designed for internal AC charging, so there aren't any external charging bricks. The right charging port is an Anderson power pole input. It supports a voltage range of 12 volts all the way up to 30 volts and automatically limits to 12 amps. The Anderson power pole port supports up to 240 watts of input, and we'll be testing that here soon. Now, when connecting the VigorPool 700 to a 12-volt battery, you'll see around 90 watts charging input. This will take about 8 hours to fully charge the power station when it's completely empty. Now, if you want to speed up the charging time with DC input, I suggest using a 12 to 24-volt boost converter. This little hack gives you around 185 watts of charging and will cut the 12-volt charging time in half down to 4 hours. Now, the fastest way to charge the Captain 700 is by connecting to an AC power source. The VigorPool supports AC charging up to 600 watts input. This will get the power station from 0% state of charge up to 100% state of charge in a little over an hour. You can also adjust the charging speed within the VigorPool Smart app. When turning on the slow charging setting, the charging speed drops down to 150 watts. When charging slowly like this, it puts less stress on the internal batteries, giving you more charge cycles down the road. Just like all other power stations I've tested on the channel, I love that you can charge this using solar panels. Let's take the power station outside and see how the charge controller performs. So we're outside to do some testing on the Captain 700 with solar panels. Now I'm going to be using this portable array that I built. Now I'm only going to use 2 of these panels. These are BougeRV 180 watt 9 bus bar solar panels, and we can only connect 2 of them together in parallel because the 30 volt cutoff, we cannot connect panels in series on this power station. Now for the actual solar conditions today, we do have some high clouds. It's 100 degrees, got a little bit of a breeze. So we'll see how much power we can get with both these panels connected together in parallel. Now here's the wiring configuration for the solar setup that I'm testing with today. So both these panels are going into 2 parallel adapters, and then we're using the stock MC4 charging cable that came with the Captain 700. Let's go ahead and see how many watts we're charging at. It's a little bit bright out here, but you can see 238 watts. So we are basically hitting the limit of the charging input for the solar on the Captain 700. So pretty good that we can hit that. Have a cloud coming in right now, so we're losing a little bit of power, but 240 watts is peak, and we got really close to that when we tested with these panels. Now just a reminder, when it's super hot like this, you want to make sure your power station is sitting in the shade, because if it's in the sun, it's going to overheat. What about dual charging the Captain 700? When I plugged in both AC charging and DC charging sources at the same time, I didn't notice a difference in total charging wattage, but I did notice that it was charging with around 100 watts from my 12-volt battery, and the rest of the power was coming from AC input. So the Captain 700 will allow you to charge from DC and AC sources at the same time, and it takes in as much DC power as possible, and then it fills in the rest with AC power. Pretty cool. When charging at the peak 600 watts, the fans on the power station put out around 50 decibels of noise. Here's what they sounded like. As my final charging test, I wanted to test pass-through charging, or the ability to charge and discharge the power station at the same time. In this test, I had the DC output, USB ports, and AC inverter all enabled while charging the Captain 700 at the same time from AC power. Looking at the screen, you can see the VigorPool was able to charge and power the loads at the same time without an issue. Now, the design on this power station is super unique. It looks like a futuristic alien spaceship, and maybe they're going for the new vibe that, all the news media outlets are all talking about aliens these days. That's kind of what vibe I get from this one. You have a handle on the back, handle on the front, really easy to carry it around. Now, this comes in at 20.2 pounds. At least that's what it said on my highly accurate Walmart home scale. And you have your fan inlets here that exhaust out the back. And there's a look at the back exhaust fans here. So really good build quality, super unique design. You'll definitely get some questions about what the heck this thing is if someone happens to see it. So in the next part of the video, I want to break down the smart app for the VigorPool power stations. Now, I will tell you it's fairly difficult to get this to sync up properly. It took me about 15 to 20 minutes, and that's even with help from one of their videos. I'll include that video down in the video description. So I hope that VigorPool would make it a little bit easier for these to sync up in this smart app, but once it's connected, it seems to work well. Now we can go in here, we can see the state of charge, the current temperature, the wattage going in and out, and you have the ability to turn on and off the outputs for the power station, so that's kind of cool to do that remotely. You can also adjust the flashlight, so you can turn on the flashlight, and it has a bunch of different settings. You can also turn on and off the automatic shutdown settings. So I have this continuous, so it does not turn off automatically, but you can set it to 3 hours or longer. Now you can also set the screen to turn on and off, and I have it set to 30 minutes because I don't want the screen to turn off while I'm recording, but if I wasn't, I'd probably have it set to 30 seconds. This also has battery protection settings from 40% up to 100%. You can turn on and off slow charging, and you can adjust the screen brightness. Now, on an earlier version of this app, I did see the ability to upgrade firmware. Now, it's currently missing on this brand new version. This is 2.0. I'm guessing they'll add that back in the 2.1 version. So it seems to work fairly well once it's connected up, and it's nice to have the smart app connectivity with a power station. Now, what about the warranty and customer support for the Captain 700? Now, the gold standard for power station warranties is 5 years. So how does this one stack up? Well, in the owner's manual, it states that this has a 24-month or 2-year warranty, and they do provide this card here that says if you register an account on their website, you get an additional year. So you get 3 years warranty with the Captain 700. Now, what about customer support? Well, the main way that I'd reach out to them is via email at the support@vigorpool.com email account, and I did have success when I tried to reach out to them, so that's good. I also found 2 phone numbers on their website, and I did try dialing those. Now, they went to voicemail eventually, and I believe that's because they are in Hong Kong. So if you wanted to reach out to them, you'd have to call them in the middle of the night if you're here in the United States. Now, unfortunately, it went to a voicemail box that was full, and I could not leave a message. So it looks like they'll have to go through there and clear out those voicemails. I'd love to get your guys' feedback. I don't have a ton of experience with VigorPool customer support, but if you guys do, throw a comment down below and let me know what your experience has been like. Well, now that we've gone ahead and tested the power stations, now we can take all those results and put them into my power station grading system. Now, this system is available down in the video description or on my website. It basically takes each of the power stations I've tested and gives it a score of 1 to 10 so we can understand how well they do against the competition. Let's see how these ones performed. So up on the screen, you'll see a breakdown of all the grading results on the Captain 700. Now, it does charge to 100% within 4 hours, so it gets a point there. It does support pass-through charging. It has a pure sine wave inverter with 120 volts output. It also has a regulated DC output. There is an informational display, and it has smart app connectivity. There are no auto shutoff settings that are a problem. Now, one issue is it does not have a 100-watt USB-C port, so I'll remove a half point there, but it does support UPS functionality. It did meet 85% of its rated capacity when we tested that. and it does charge within 5 hours using solar panels. Now the price per watt hour on this is fairly decent at 74 cents, so it does get a full point at being under 80 cents per watt hour. So there you have it, 9.5 points out of 10 points available. Very good score for the Captain 700. Basically lost out on that half point because of the USB-C not being a 100-watt port. Now I do have a few changes coming to the power station grading system here in the future. I will go back and change everything in the past, but I've gotten a lot of feedback, so keep in mind I do have some changes coming to the grading sheet. Now, what did you guys think of the Captain 700? I'd love to get your guys' feedback. Throw a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this. How is the price? $499 as the launch price? All the features that it offers? What do you guys think? Especially the ability to be able to put two of these together and get double the wattage and double the capacity. A very cool feature that is pretty rare on these power stations. Now, if you like the video, please smash the thumbs up button. I'll include all the links to these products down in the video description. Thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll see you guys in the next video. Till next time.